Welcome to the D2D Real Estate Show. Here with Craig, and he's got some awesome insight as to what he can tell us about personality types. As you sell people, there are different ways in which you're going to sell different people. Not every person is created equal. So, Craig, tell us about personality types.
This is huge, Duane. When I first learned this many years ago, it opened up a new world for me, and understanding how to get someone to sign something or do whatever it is that you need to have them do. And so the personality profile that I like to subscribe to is the DISC personality profile. That's DISC. And I would recommend any of you to do a deep dive research on that, but we'll give some of the insights about it right now, some of the highlights. So D, dominant, I, influential, S is more of like a stable or steady, and C is compliant. But I'll go through these letters and sort of dive into what each of these means, and then we can talk about how to sell to them.
Well, let me ask you this. Is it important for you to know your own personality profile so that you know how to relate to others and why?
Oh, for sure. I'll just give you a brief example. So D is the driver. That's the dominant personality style. And I'm more of the I, which is the super social, and the C, which is very analytical. And so I approach my life a lot through that lens. And I remember a seller many years ago that I got out of that listing appointment, and I just felt like, man, I didn't jive with this personality type. What was it? I didn't know, and I hadn't studied this yet. Come to find out, he was a D, a driver, and I was approaching him from the lens of a C, a very analytical. And so it wasn't till later I studied this and realized, okay, I still got the listing agreement, but there was friction in that appointment, and I just feel like it didn't go well. And I found out, okay, the D, the dominant personality type, they're individuals that like to get straight to the point. They don't like to be bored with a ton of data. And so here I am, this C, coming up with tons of data to the seller, and he didn't want to see the nuances. Just cut to the bottom line. What is that bottom line number? What is the bottom line conclusion? And here I wasn't picking up on that cue from him until later, and then he straight up said, Craig, just tell me, what's the best? What is it? Just tell me the best. Like, cut to the chase. He didn't say this, don't waste my time, but you know that's what he was thinking, don't waste my time.
Sure.
So anyway, I didn't realize that about my own personality until I went through this and took the own test, and I realized, okay, so I'm a social and very analytical, and how does that personality relate to the rest of the world where you've got the D's, the DISC? So I figured that out, and it's helped me big time. So now when I'm in front of someone where I detect they're a D and a driver, I say, look, I've got a packet with the info. Do you want to read, the different items in it, like look at the different comps in detail, or do you want to just go to the bottom line? And then these appointments flow very smoothly with these Ds, and I get along great with the Ds. Whereas before, I didn't realize that was where the friction point was.
I think as we start this out, Craig, it's important for our listeners and viewers to know maybe even our own personality types, because I'm so different. I don't know what a DISC is. I've never looked at a profile thing, and I've always thought, man, who would take their time to go fill out one of those things? But I can look at people and adjust and read them that way. But I'm following something you just have analytics behind. And I think it's funny because you look at you and I, and we are so different. I tell people as they come in and I meet with them to join our brokerage, I was like, Craig is a guru. He's the kind of guy that'll sit behind a computer in real estate school and take notes. I was the guy that hit play and went outside and then came back, and I'm like, oh, crap, now I've got to answer this quiz, and I'll fail it twice, and then I'll go past. Or Craig will do a CMA that takes 20 or 30 minutes, and he can explain every pro and con and why this adjustment happened and why. And mine take 2 minutes, and I'm going to sit down and sell them on why I came up with that price and why they should list with me.
And you are a D, like a typical D right there.
So I'm a D. What are you?
The I and the C is pretty much pretty.
Do I have
equivalent.
other? Do I get a cross reference, or I just get one thing? I'm a D.
You're a D. I haven't actually seen you take the test, so you probably have a secondary. You do have a secondary somewhere in there. I just don't know what it is yet. So take the test, and we'll figure it out. But your D comes through very predominantly. And here's an example. So when you go car shopping, tell me experience when you're going and you're telling a dealer what you're looking for. What is it? How do you approach that?
I mean, it's a don't waste my time approach. Here, either get me to the right numbers, I've done my research, I'll pay cash, and if you don't have what I want, great, I'll go to the next guy.
So if you say, hey, I want this kind of car, and you give them 4 or 5 variables, and they come back and say, hey, great, I got something for you, and they give you 3 of the 5 variables, what are you going to do?
I don't know. I mean, if 3 of the 5 variables are what I want, then I'm going to negotiate and find out which one I'm going to get the best price on.
Okay, but what if, like, let's say you wanted a particular color and they didn't have that color?
Then I'm going to walk and go to the next door.
See, that's the classic right there. And we didn't even pre-plan this, but that is the classic response of a D right there.
Well, that's so funny because we're buying a car right now. I'm going to go get it tomorrow for my wife, and even just the little things I'm negotiating. So they came back and they got me this price, and they're like, we're below MSRP, and there's not a lot of cars out there, and there's a $395 prep fee, and so I negotiate, and this price is, I've called all over the United States to find this car, right? And I'm not shopping in Utah, and I try to negotiate the price down just to $395, and they won't waive the dock fee. And I'm like, okay, so let's try a different angle, and I brought them down over $500 a different way, and I felt, man, that's not enough money. I don't feel like I did a good enough job negotiating, almost to the point that I'd almost walk away from buying that car out of pride because I didn't get a good enough deal in my mind when it's the best deal out there across the United States. So it's crazy the different personality types you run into.
Yeah, so the C would have bought because they would have analyzed and realized this is the best deal I'm buying. The D, you've got something else that's driving you in making your decisions. And so when you're in front of now this is really pronounced when you're in front of a seller. And so if I'm going to come to you and I'm selling your home and you're a traditional seller, you're not an agent. And now that I know, knowing that you're a D, when I would come in and approach you, I would just come in and say probably three photos of the best comps with like just tiny little details about it. And hey, here's your bottom line. And deliver that. Just here's what it is. Because you would have kicked me out of the house and I said, okay, we're opening up my laptop and we're going to review the 38 pages of this market analysis. And you'd say, okay, you'd be looking at your watch, be looking at your wife, like, okay, I've got other things I got to, done. So it's really important to know who you are and who they are. So let me give you some tips on how I identify this on a listing appointment.
Awesome.
Okay. So my strategy when I walk into a listing, I walk in and then I like to tour the home first. The touring the home part, it's not because I want to see the home. It's because I want to have time with the seller to identify where does this seller fall on the DISC personality profile. And if I identify that there's C, I'm going to handle the close differently than if it's a D, than if it's an I, than if it's an S. And so I'm asking questions such as, hey, so what do you do for work? Typically, that will be telling. If they say, hey, I'm an accountant,
analytical.
C. Yeah. Yep. I'm an engineer. I'm a computer programmer. Or if they say, hey, I'm in marketing, if they say something else that, I do theater, whatever it may be, then you might begin to think, okay, they might be an I, or they might be one of these other letters. Now, if you detect, it's super easy to detect the I's. They give themselves away like right away because they're super social, super bubbly, and they're talking about things unrelated to the business. The reason why you're there, they're going to be talking about their dog and their pictures on the wall and things like that. And as soon as I detect that, I change my strategy as well. I begin to ask them, I say, hey, so where are you from originally? And I start digging into their family life.
So you turn into a chatty Cathy essentially and chat with them and get them to disclose and become their best friend.
Yeah.
Yep, makes sense.
And I think where you've succeeded in this, even though you haven't necessarily maybe studied the DISC as deeply as I have, you just naturally mirror people anyway. Right. And I think that's where you succeed. And you probably become that chatty Cathy as well when you're walking through and detect that.
You have to. So
the science behind it being that the person you're chatty Cathy, whatever, with is the I personality profile type. That's awesome. And so you just naturally detected it. And so you just started asking them about their kids and about their hobbies and about where are you going on vacation for the summer? And you're just building this natural relationship with that person. So anyway, it's easy to pick out the I. The hardest ones are picking out the S's. They're the people that are really stable and steady. Now, their job profile typically would look like an administrative position, something that's very routine,
non-emotional.
Yeah, and it's just you can predict your environment day in and day out, and they've been at that job for a long time, typically that kind of thing. So the S's, if you don't know that they're an S and you're a D, you won't close the sale because D's drive And S's don't like change, with selling a home being a massive change. And so if a D approaches an S as a D, they're going to fail. And there's a caveat to this, and I'll tell you later how you get the S to agree to go forward with you. But if you approach them as a D, you're going to run into troubles. So with S's, it's a self-discovery process. You have to have them discover their own solutions. And the way you get them to do that is question-based selling.
That's awesome.
So the cool part about this, and this is where, this is a whole other topic, but question-based selling, if you use that approach, you can sell to every one of these personality types, every single one of them. It works on every one of them. You don't even have to really change your style if you can approach it from the question-based selling. But if you don't use that, you have to be really, really good at understanding what their type is and selling to that type. But if you use question-based selling, that is the only way to close the S's. But it also works on a D, I, or C, like beautifully.
Do you think that as you see people, even before they're engaging with you, you can read the body language and tell what type of personality type they are within the first couple minutes of meeting them?
I do. I think I could pick out 2 or 3 of the profiles within a couple minutes based on body language and based on sometimes even dress or, the way that they approach you physically, like how close they're standing to you, the demeanor that they have, for sure. You can pick that up pretty quickly.
Cool.
So let me give a quick example of of how I closed a commercial deal using the disc. Okay. So I showed up to.
Not try that.
Yeah, there we go. So it was a commercial building downtown Salt Lake City. Went to the listing appointment and toured through the building. And as I was going through, I detected a few things about the seller. First, when he showed up, no notes in his hand, no paper, no pen, and no tablet. I'm like, okay, he's not a C, because a C is going to come, an analytical is going to come, and he's going to write notes. So, okay, he's not a C, so he's not really data-driven. Okay, let's see how he goes as we're going through this. He starts cracking jokes. He starts talking about off-topic things, not even pertaining to why we were there. And I'm starting to think, okay, he's not a D, where he's like really time-sensitive and just driving to the point. He wasn't even trying to get to the point on things. He was prolonging things. I'm like, okay, so he's not a C. He's not a D. And so he's going to either be an I or an S, but I could tell pretty quickly he's an I because he was becoming really bubbly. So I thought, okay, I've got to make a relationship connection with this bubbly guy in order to really cement the deal. They're interviewing multiple agents, and it's a multi-million-dollar deal. So as we get through and we're touring, and we get toward the very end, and we're ready to sort of close them at that point, my closing question was this: hey, where did you grow up? And he said, well, I grew up on the east side of Salt Lake City, or the Salt Lake Valley. I said, oh, great. So like whereabouts? Because I grew up in the east side of Salt Lake Valley too. And then he starts talking about Cottonwood Heights, and then I said, oh, you grew up in Cottonwood Heights, or you live in Cottonwood Heights? That's where I grew up. Do you know? I said, where? We started pinpointing where exactly did you live, and suddenly we realized that our homes were maybe 3, 4, 5 miles apart. And I started to ask more questions and found out that he knew my dad. And just through that relationship that he had, knowing my dad, which he had a favorable view of, that helped. But then I asked, so is your son's name so-and-so? Yeah. How did you, because his son went with me to school, elementary on through high school. And suddenly I've formed these multiple connections with him. And it was just one of those awesome aha moments that you're like, wow, we're linked together on this relationship. And he asked like nothing about our marketing plan, nothing about, the other questions you typically get on a commercial listing appointment. On the way out the door, he said, we've interviewed a lot of people. You're at the top now. And we got him to sign a listing agreement and went under contract on
and I would say that it has a lot more to do with just, you being friends or growing up in the same neighborhood. It's simply that you took the time to figure out his personality type and to connect with him on an emotional level, at which point he could trust you.
Yeah, I would agree. And trust is what he's looking for. And being an I type, he liked that relationship. He liked that trust. So anyway, the disc has been super huge for me, and it was revelatory, especially early in my career. And if I think those of you who are an I or an S, when you feel like the other party's running you over, your client, and is a D type, you might feel inferior at that moment, because if you don't understand the personality profile. But when you come to learn it and then begin to speak their language, suddenly instead of being run over by them, you are on the same wavelength of them. And it's awesome. It's so good. And so revelatory. So we do more teachings about this, and we train deeper on DISC, but those are things that we don't have time for this podcast. But we'd love to interface with you one-on-one. And also in other group settings, we've got a webinar where we teach question-based selling and other door-knocking strategies, and we would love to have you join us on one of those, and even reach out to us individually. We'd love to chat. So click the link below. We would love to meet you in person and help you further and answer other questions you may have and take your business to the next level.